The carriage wheels stopped hard outside the manor gates. Agatha Culworth felt her husband's hand close around her wrist before she understood why. Silas pulled her down the stone steps, past the startled servants, straight toward a black coach bearing a crest she had never seen on their land before. Papers were already signed. She saw them clutched in a stranger's gloved hand before she even saw his face. Thaddeus Reeve, Duke of Blackmere, stepped out of that coach like a man collecting something he had already paid for. Silas would not look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the small leather pouch the Duke's steward placed in his palm, heavier than any harvest he had earned that year. Agatha understood before a single word was spoken. Her husband had sold her to settle his debts. What none of them understood that morning, not Silas, not the servants watching from the windows, not even the Duke himself, was that the moment that coach pulled away with Agatha inside it, the Culworth name had already begun to fall apart behind them. Tell me, if you were standing in that courtyard watching this happen, would you have believed Silas could go this far? Drop your answer in the comments and tell me which part of the world you're watching from tonight. I always go through and reply. If you're new here, subscribe now, because what happens to Agatha in that Duke's house is going to change everything you think you know about this family. The road to Blackmere had never felt so long. Agatha sat rigid inside the coach, her hands folded tight in her lap, watching the hedgerows blur past the window. Across from her, Thaddeus Reeve said nothing. He simply watched her, the way a man studies something he has waited a long time to hold. 3 days earlier, none of this had existed. Agatha had woken in her own bed beside Silas, unaware that her husband had already signed her life away to a moneylender's demand. She had spent that morning tending the kitchen garden, unaware that somewhere in the house, papers were being drawn that would end her marriage before nightfall. Silas Culworth had inherited a fine house and a fading fortune. His father had left him land, horses, and debts buried beneath false smiles at every dinner table in the county. For 2 years, Silas had borrowed from Corbin Ashby, a merchant with cold eyes and colder patience, to keep up appearances no one questioned aloud. Each season he told himself the next harvest would set things right. Each season the debt grew heavier instead. Corbin had finally come to collect. He arrived at the Culworth estate on a grey morning, his carriage stopping just short of the front steps. Silas met him in the study, the door shut, though the servants still heard the shouting. "You have had 2 years," Corbin said. "I have been patient longer than any sensible man should be." "I need more time," Silas answered. "The harvest will cover it." "The harvest will not cover half of what you owe me," Corbin said. "And I am done waiting on promises that never come true." Silas paced the room like a man searching for an exit that did not exist. He thought of selling the horses, the silver, even the land itself, but none of it would clear a debt that had grown far past what any sale could answer. Then Corbin said something that changed everything. "There is another way," he said. "The Duke of Blackmere has expressed interest in a wife. A woman of quiet grace, good bearing, capable of managing a great house. He would pay handsomely for such an arrangement, enough to clear every debt you owe me and leave a coin besides." Silas said nothing for a long moment. His mind turned the idea over slowly, testing it the way a man tests ice before stepping onto a frozen lake. "You are speaking of my wife," he finally said. "I am speaking of your survival," Corbin answered. "Your name, your house, your children's future, all of it depends on what you decide in the next hour. I will not offer this arrangement twice." Silas sat down heavily, his hands pressed against his face. He thought of Agatha in the garden, humming to herself as she always did, unaware that her fate was being decided a few rooms away. Guilt rose in him briefly, then sank beneath the weight of fear. "I will need time to consider," he said. "You have until morning," Corbin answered, rising from his chair. "The Duke does not like to wait. And neither do I." Silas did not tell Agatha that night. He sat across from her at supper, watching her speak of small things, the herbs she meant to plant, a letter from her sister in the north, and said nothing of the decision pressing down on him like a stone. He did not tell her the next morning either. He waited until Corbin returned with the papers already drawn, until the Duke's coach was already approaching the gates, and only then did he take her hand and walk her down the front steps as though escorting her to church. Agatha had not resisted. She had simply gone still, the way a bird goes still before a hawk's shadow crosses the grass. She looked at the coach, then at her husband's face, and understood before either man spoke a single word to her directly. Now, sitting across from the man who owned the paper that bound her, she finally spoke. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked. "What use is a wife bought like cattle at market?" Thaddeus did not answer right away. He looked out the window instead, his jaw set, watching the fields roll past as though the answer might be found somewhere among them. "I did not want a wife bought at the market," he said. "I wanted a wife who would survive one." Agatha frowned at him, uncertain whether to hate him more or less for honesty. "You could have refused the arrangement," she said. "You could have sent your steward away and let my husband drown in his own debts." "I could have," Thaddeus agreed. "But then Ashby would have found another buyer, one far less concerned with your comfort than I intend to be. There are men in this county who would have used you far worse than I ever will." Agatha turned back to the window, unwilling to let him see how those words settled in her chest despite herself. The coach passed through the gates of Blackmere as the sun began to lower behind the hills. The manor rose before them, grey stone and tall windows, ivy climbing one wing like it had grown there since before the house had a name. Servants lined the steps, silent and watching, as the coach came to a stop. A woman stepped forward first, younger than Thaddeus by several years, sharp-eyed and composed. This was Beatrice Reeve, the Duke's sister, and she studied Agatha the way one studies an unexpected guest at a wedding. "So this is her," Beatrice said, not unkindly, though not warmly either. "This is Agatha," Thaddeus said. "She will be treated as mistress of this house from this day forward. See that everyone understands that clearly." Beatrice's eyes flicked toward her brother, questions gathering behind them, but she said nothing further in front of the staff. An older woman stepped forward next, her hands folded neatly at her waist. This was Mrs. Whitfield, the housekeeper, who had served the Reeve family for over 20 years and had buried 2 mistresses of this house already. "Welcome, my lady," she said, her voice gentle, despite the strangeness of the arrival. "We will see you settled before supper." Agatha followed her inside, past a hall lined with portraits of Reeve ancestors, dukes and duchesses long since past, their painted eyes seeming to track her steps. She felt smaller with everyone she passed, though she refused to let it show on her face. Mrs. Whitfield noticed the way her hands trembled slightly and slowed her pace, offering small comforts without ever naming the fear directly. "The staff will not trouble you," she said, "whatever they may whisper below the stairs. None of it changes your place at this table now." Meanwhile, back at the Colworth estate, Silas sat alone in his study, with the money spread across his desk. He had expected relief. Instead, he felt a hollow pressure settle behind his ribs, one that grew heavier the longer he stared at the coin. He counted it twice as though counting might make the weight easier to carry. His mother, Hesper Colworth, entered without knocking, her face already pale with the news that had reached her through the servants, faster than her son could explain it himself. "Tell me this is not true," she said. "Tell me you did not sell your wife to settle a debt." Silas did not look up. "I had no other way," he said. "There is always another way," Hesper snapped. "You have shamed this family beyond anything your father ever did, and he did plenty in his time." Silas finally raised his eyes to hers. "The debt is paid," he said. "The house is safe." "The house means nothing without honor to stand beside it," Hesper said. "And you have thrown yours into that man's coach along with your wife. Do not expect me to sit quietly while the county learns what you have done." She left him alone with his coin and his silence, and for the first time since signing the papers, Silas began to understand that something far greater than money had just left his house. At Blackmere, Agatha was shown to a chamber far grander than anything she had known in her marriage. A young maid named Peggy helped her out of her travelling cloak, chattering softly about the house, the gardens, the kitchens below, anything to fill the quiet that clung to the new mistress like a second skin. "You need not fear him," Peggy said carefully, glancing toward the door. "The Duke, I mean. He's not like the stories they tell in the village." "What stories?" Agatha asked. Peggy hesitated, then shook her head. "Old stories," she said. "Best forgotten now that you are here. There is enough to worry about without borrowing trouble from the past." Agatha did not press further, though the words lingered as she sat by the window that evening, watching the last light fade over unfamiliar hills. Somewhere below she could hear voices, Beatrice arguing quietly with her brother, though the words were too faint to catch clearly. She wondered how many arguments had already begun on her account, and how many more waited ahead of her. She did not yet know that her arrival had already begun to shift the balance of power inside Blackmere, nor that Silas's decision would soon reach ears far beyond the Colworth estate, ears belonging to men who had waited years for a reason to bring the Duke of Blackmere down. By the second morning, word of the arrangement had already begun travelling through the county faster than any coach could carry it. Servants spoke to other servants at the well and the market stalls. Merchants spoke to other merchants over their ledgers. And within 3 days, the story reached a man who had been waiting a long time for exactly this kind of opportunity. Lord Nathaniel Grey read the report from his steward with a slow, satisfied smile. He had spent years watching Thaddeus Reeve inherit every advantage he himself had been denied, the title, the land, the respect of men twice his age. Now, at last, there was a crack in the foundation, and he intended to widen it. "A wife bought from a debtor," Nathaniel said, setting the letter down. "Even the Duke of Blackmere cannot survive that scandal reaching the right ears." His steward shifted uncomfortably. "The arrangement was private, my lord. There is no proof beyond rumour." "Rumour is enough to start a fire," Nathaniel said. "I only need to choose where to throw the first spark. Send word to Lady Prescott. She hosts a gathering this month, and gatherings are where reputations rise and fall fastest." Back at Blackmere, Agatha had begun to find a strange rhythm inside the unfamiliar walls. She rose early, walked the gardens before the household woke, and slowly began learning the names of the staff who watched her with cautious curiosity. Among them was an older gardener named Josiah Fenn, who spoke little but always tipped his hat when she passed, and a stable boy named Toby Marsh, barely older than 15, who seemed endlessly fascinated that the new mistress preferred walking to riding in the carriage. "You could take the mare out, my lady," Toby offered one morning, brushing down a horse near the stable door. "She is gentle enough for a first ride." "Perhaps another day," Agatha answered, though the offer warmed something in her that had felt cold since her arrival. It was the first kindness offered without hesitation since she had passed through the gates. Thaddeus watched her from a distance most mornings, though he rarely approached. When he did, their conversations remained careful, guarded. Two people testing the ground beneath an arrangement neither had chosen freely. "You rise early," he said one morning, finding her near the rose hedges. "I have always risen early," Agatha answered. "It is one of the few things that still belongs to me." Thaddeus absorbed that without response for a moment, his eyes moving over the roses as though searching for the right words among the thorns. "I did not intend to take everything from you," he said finally. "You did not ask what you were taking," Agatha said. "You simply signed the papers and called it kindness." Thaddeus's jaw tightened, though he did not argue the point. "I will not pretend the arrangement was fair," he said, "but I intend to make certain you are never treated as property inside these walls. That much I can promise you, whatever else you choose to believe of me." Agatha studied him carefully, searching his face for the trick she was certain must be hiding somewhere beneath his words. She found none, which unsettled her more than if she had. That afternoon, Beatrice sought her brother out in his study, closing the door firmly behind her. "You cannot keep her here without consequence," Beatrice said. "Every family with an unmarried daughter within 50 miles will use this against you. They will say you bought a wife like livestock, and they will not say it quietly." "I did not ask for your opinion on the matter," Thaddeus said. "You never do," Beatrice answered. "Yet I am the one who must sit across from Lady Prescott at supper and explain why our house now shelters another man's wife. I have already heard whispers from her footman, and whispers travel faster than any letter." "Then explain nothing," Thaddeus said. "Let them speculate. I will not undo what has already been done." Beatrice studied her brother for a long moment, something softening slightly in her expression, despite her frustration. "You care for her already," she said. "I can see it plainly enough, even if you refuse to admit it aloud." Thaddeus did not answer, though the silence between them said more than any words could have offered. 3 days later, the first sign of trouble arrived, in the form of a letter delivered to the Colworth estate. Silas opened it, expecting another demand from Ashby. Instead, he found a message from Nathaniel Gray, offering condolences for what he called an unfortunate arrangement, and hinting that certain details of the sale had already reached ears in the capital, ears that belonged to men who decided which families kept their standing, and which did not. Silas read the letter twice before the meaning fully settled over him. Someone intended to use Agatha's sale as a weapon, not against him, but against the Duke himself, and by extension against the Colworth name that remained bound to the arrangement, regardless of who held the papers now. He rode to Blackmere that same afternoon, arriving unannounced and demanding to see Thaddeus. The Duke received him coldly in the same study where the arrangement had first been discussed. "Nathaniel Gray knows," Silas said, thrusting the letter forward. "He intends to use this against you, and against my family besides." Thaddeus read the letter in silence, his expression unreadable, though something hardened behind his eyes with each line. "Gray has wanted a reason to move against me for years," he said finally. "This merely gives him an audience, willing to listen to whatever he chooses to say." "Then undo it," Silas said. "Send her home before this ruins us both." Thaddeus set the letter down slowly, his hand flat against the desk as though holding something in place. "She is no longer yours to reclaim," he said. "The papers were signed. The arrangement is final. And even if it were not, I would not send her back to a house that sold her the moment her value became inconvenient to keep." Silas's face reddened, though whatever protest he intended to make caught in his throat when Agatha appeared in the doorway, having heard enough of the conversation to understand its shape. "You came to reclaim me," she said quietly, "or to protect your own name from scandal." Silas could not answer immediately, and in that hesitation, Agatha found the only answer she needed. She watched his eyes drop first to the letter, then to the floor, never once rising to meet hers directly. "Leave," she said. "Whatever happens next, it no longer concerns you." Silas left Blackmere that evening with nothing resolved, his carriage disappearing down the same road that had carried Agatha away only days before. He did not look back at the manor gates, though Agatha watched from an upstairs window until the coach vanished completely from sight, something in her chest loosening for the first time since she had arrived. Behind him, inside the manor walls, the true consequences of his decision were only beginning to take shape. Consequences that would soon reach far beyond one broken marriage and threaten the very foundation of the house that had taken her in. The invitation arrived on a plain card, sealed with wax and delivered by a footman who did not wait for a reply. Millicent Prescott requested the presence of the Duke of Blackmere and his household at a gathering the following week. Beatrice read it twice before setting it down on the table with visible unease. "She has heard everything already," Beatrice said. "This invitation is not kindness. It is an invitation to watch us fall apart in front of half the county." Thaddeus read the card himself, his expression giving nothing away. "Then we will not give her the satisfaction," he said. "We attend, and we attend as though nothing is wrong at all." Agatha listened from the doorway, her arms folded against the chill that had settled over the house since Silas had left. She had spent the past days learning the shape of Blackmere, its long corridors, its quiet library, its gardens that Josiah tended with more care than most men gave their own children. She had not expected to be pulled so quickly into the world beyond its gates. "You wish me to attend as well?" she asked. "You are the mistress of this house," Thaddeus said. "If I hide you away now, I confirm every rumor Grey wishes to spread. If I bring you forward, I deny him the story he wants to tell." Agatha considered this, then nodded once, though the thought of standing before a room full of strangers who already knew the shape of her sail settled uneasily in her stomach. The evening of the gathering arrived cold and clear. The Prescott estate glowed with candlelight from every window, carriages lining the drive as guests arrived in careful procession. Agatha stepped down from the Blackmere coach with her chin lifted, refusing to let her hands shake, despite the eyes that turned toward her the moment she crossed the threshold. Millicent Prescott greeted them at the door herself, a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Your Grace," she said, extending a hand to Thaddeus before turning her gaze to Agatha. "And this must be the new addition to your household. How fortunate you were able to join us on such short notice." The insult sat beneath her words like a blade beneath silk, but Agatha met her eyes without flinching. "I am grateful for the invitation," Agatha said, "though I confess I did not expect to be spoken of before I had even arrived." A flicker of surprise crossed Millicent's face, quickly smoothed away behind practiced composure. "Word travels quickly in this county," she said. "You will grow accustomed to it." Inside, the gathering moved through its practiced rhythms, conversation and music, and the careful positioning of guests who wished to be seen speaking with the right people. Agatha stayed close to Thaddeus, aware of the glances that followed her across the room, some curious, some openly hostile. It was there that she first noticed Nathaniel Gray, standing near the far window with a glass in hand, watching the room the way a hawk watches a field before choosing where to strike. He did not approach immediately. He waited until Thaddeus had been drawn into conversation with another guest, leaving Agatha momentarily alone near the refreshment table. "You must be the woman everyone is speaking of," Nathaniel said, stepping closer with an easy smile that did not reach his eyes. "I am Agatha Colworth," she answered evenly. "Reeve, surely," Nathaniel corrected. "Or does your former husband's name still cling to you despite the sale?" Agatha's spine straightened, though she kept her voice steady. "I do not believe we have been introduced," she said. "Nathaniel Gray," he said, offering a small bow. "An old friend of the Duke's family, though friends may be too generous a word these days." "What word would you prefer?" Agatha asked. "Rival," Nathaniel said simply, "though I suspect you already sensed that much on your own." Before Agatha could respond, Thaddeus appeared at her side, his expression cool as he regarded Nathaniel directly. "Gray," he said, "I did not expect you to attend." "I would not miss an evening such as this," Nathaniel said, "especially not when the guest of honor has such an interesting story attached to her arrival." "Whatever story you intend to tell," Thaddeus said, "I suggest you tell it carefully. I have little patience left for games tonight." Nathaniel's smile widened slightly, unbothered by the warning. "No games," he said. "Only curiosity. A duke buying himself a wife from a drowning man's debts is not something the capital hears of every season. I imagine there are men there who would find it fascinating." "Then let them find it fascinating from a distance," Thaddeus said. "You will not use this gathering to spread whatever version of events suits you best." Nathaniel inclined his head, though his eyes lingered on Agatha a moment longer before he stepped away, melting back into the crowd with the ease of a man who had planted exactly the seed he intended. Later that evening, as the gathering began to thin, Agatha found herself briefly alone in a quiet hallway, catching her breath after the weight of so many watching eyes. It was there that a man she did not recognize approached her, introducing himself as Barnaby Croft, a magistrate from the Northern District. "Forgive the intrusion," he said. "I could not help but notice you standing apart from the others. It is a great deal to endure, I imagine, arriving under such circumstances." "You speak as though you already know my circumstances," Agatha said carefully. "Everyone in this room knows them," Croft said, not unkindly, "though few will say so to your face. I only wish to offer that not every man here believes the arrangement reflects poorly on you. Some of us understand a woman rarely chooses the debts that bind her." Agatha studied him, uncertain whether to trust the sympathy in his voice. "Why tell me this?" she asked. "Because Nathaniel Gray does not attend gatherings without purpose," Croft said, lowering his voice slightly. "And I suspect his purpose tonight extends further than idle gossip. Be careful, my lady. Men like him rarely strike where they are expected." Before Agatha could ask him to explain further, Beatrice appeared, drawing her back toward the main hall with a quiet urgency that suggested the evening had grown long enough. Croft offered a final nod before disappearing into the crowd himself, leaving Agatha with more questions than she had arrived with. The ride home passed in silence, Thaddeus staring out the window with the same unreadable expression he wore during difficult conversations. Agatha finally broke the quiet as the manor gates came into view. "Gray means to do more than spread rumors," she said. "A magistrate warned me as much tonight." Thaddeus turned to look at her fully for the first time since leaving the gathering, "Croft spoke with you," he said, something sharpening in his tone. "He said Gray rarely strikes where he is expected," Agatha said. "What did he mean by that?" Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment before answering. "There is history between my family and Gray's that predates you entirely," he said. "History I had hoped would remain buried. It seems your arrival has given him a reason to dig it up again." "What history?" Agatha asked. Thaddeus did not answer immediately, his eyes returning to the passing hills outside the window. "One I will explain when I better understand how deep he intends to dig," he said finally. Agatha did not press further, though the unease that had followed her since the gathering settled deeper into her chest, a quiet certainty that whatever Nathaniel Gray intended, it had little to do with scandal and everything to do with something far older and far more dangerous. The following days passed with a tense, watchful quiet. Thaddeus spent long hours locked in his study with correspondence spread across his desk, while Beatrice moved through the house with the sharp focus of someone bracing for a storm she could sense, but not yet see. Agatha, left largely to herself, found her thoughts circling back constantly to the magistrate's warning and the history Thaddeus refused to explain. It was Josiah, tending the roses one morning, who finally offered a piece of the answer she had been searching for. "You wish to know about Gray," he said, without looking up from his work. "I heard you asking Peggy about him yesterday." Agatha knelt beside him, lowering her voice. "Do you know what happened between him and the Duke?" she asked. Josiah was quiet for a moment, his hand still moving carefully among the thorns. "It goes back to the old Duke," he said. "Thaddeus's father. There was a dispute over the title many years ago, before Thaddeus was born. Gray's family believed they held a stronger claim to Blackmere through an older line, one that had been passed over generations before in favor of the Reeves. The matter was settled in court, but Nathaniel's father never accepted the ruling. He raised his son on the belief that the title had been stolen from them. Agatha absorbed this slowly, pieces beginning to align in her mind. "So Gray believes Blackmere should have been his family's all along," she said. "He believes it with every breath he takes," Josiah said. "And a scandal involving a purchased wife is exactly the kind of weakness a man like that would use to reopen old wounds. If he can prove the Duke's household is built on dishonorable dealings, he may find sympathetic ears willing to question whether the Reeves deserve the title at all." The weight of this settled heavily over Agatha as she returned inside, understanding now that she had become not merely an embarrassment to be whispered about, but a weapon Nathaniel intended to use against the very foundation of the house that had taken her in. That afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at Blackmere. Corbin Ashby stood at the door, hat in hand, his usual composure noticeably shaken. Mrs. Whitfield showed him into the study reluctantly, unsure why the moneylender who had orchestrated the original arrangement would return now. Thaddeus regarded him coldly from behind his desk. "You have some nerve showing your face here," he said. "I would not have come if the matter were not urgent," Corbin said. "I have learned something you need to hear, something I did not fully understand myself until recently." "Speak plainly," Thaddeus said. Corbin hesitated, glancing toward the door as though fearing the walls themselves might carry his words further than intended. "The debt Silas Colworth owed me did not accumulate naturally," he said. "It was encouraging. Someone paid me to extend him credit far beyond what a sensible man would offer, and to press him harder than I normally would once the sum grew large enough to matter." Thaddeus's expression darkened. "Who?" he asked, though the answer had already begun forming in his mind. "Nathaniel Gray," Corbin said. "He came to me over a year ago, long before the sale was ever proposed. He wanted Silas indebted deeply enough that desperation would eventually force his hand. I did not know at the time what use he intended to make of it. I assumed he simply wished to see the Colworths ruined for reasons of his own. I did not know it would end with a woman sold to settle accounts that were never meant to be paid honestly in the first place. The room fell silent as the full shape of the scheme settled over everyone present. Agatha, who had entered quietly partway through the conversation, felt the floor shift beneath her understanding of everything that had happened since that grey morning in her old garden. He orchestrated all of it, she said slowly. My husband's debt, the sale, even the arrangement with you. From the very beginning. Corbin nodded grimly. I believe so, he said, though I did not understand my part in it until Gray approached me again last week, asking whether I would testify that the sale had been coerced, should the matter ever reach a magistrate's attention. Thaddeus rose from his desk, his composure finally cracking beneath the weight of the revelation. He means to use the sale as proof of dishonor, he said, not merely to embarrass me, but to argue the entire household is unfit to hold the title. If Ashby testifies, the arrangement was built on manufactured debt. Gray will claim I purchased a wife through deliberate ruin of another family, a crime serious enough to warrant an inquiry into everything my father left me. Will you testify against him now? Agatha asked, turning to Corbin. Now that you understand what he used you for. Corbin's hands trembled slightly as he considered the question. Gray is a dangerous man to cross, he said. But I did not sign on to destroy a household built on nothing worse than a man saving his own name from ruin. I will testify, if it comes to that, though I fear it may already be too late to stop whatever he has already set in motion. As if summoned by the words themselves, a servant appeared at the study door moments later, breathless from having run the length of the house. Your Grace, she said. A messenger has arrived from the capital. He says Lord Gray has already filed a formal complaint requesting an inquiry into the legitimacy of your title, citing dishonorable conduct in the acquisition of your household. The room went utterly still. Agatha watched the color drain slowly from Thaddeus's face as the full scope of Nathaniel's plan finally revealed itself completely, no longer a threat whispered in ballrooms, but a blade already swinging toward the very heart of everything Blackmere had ever stood for. He moved faster than we expected, Beatrice said quietly from the doorway, having arrived just in time to hear the news herself. Thaddeus said nothing for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the window, beyond the gardens, beyond anything Agatha could see. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she had not heard from him before. Then we have no choice left, he said. We fight this in the open, or we lose everything my family has held for 3 generations. The inquiry was set for a fortnight hence, to be held before a panel of magistrates in the capital, men whose names Agatha had never heard spoken aloud until now. Thaddeus spent the first 3 days after the news arrived in near constant motion, sending letters, receiving visitors, riding out at odd hours to speak with men whose loyalty he needed to secure before Nathaniel could turn them against him. Agatha found herself drawn into the effort, despite having no formal place in it. She sat with Beatrice each evening, reviewing correspondence, learning the names of men who might stand as witnesses, understanding slowly that her own testimony would matter more than anyone had first suggested. They will ask you why you didn't resist the sale, Beatrice said one evening, her quill pausing over a letter. Gray will paint you as either a victim too broken to object, proof of cruelty in this house, or as a woman who agreed willingly, proof that the arrangement was calculated rather than honorable. Either answer serves him. Then I will give them a third answer, Agatha said. The truth. That I had no power to resist a decision made without my knowledge, and that whatever came after was built with more honesty than the sale itself ever held. Beatrice studied her for a long moment, something like respect settling into her expression. You have grown steadier than I expected, she said. When you first arrived, I did not think you would last a season in this house. I did not think so either, Agatha admitted. Thaddeus joined them near the fire once the letters had been sealed, his face drawn with the particular weariness of a man who had spent the day arguing with allies who wished to remain neutral until the outcome was certain. Lord Prescott will not commit either way, he said, dropping into the chair opposite. He fears offending whichever side proves stronger. Half the county behaves the same, waiting to see which way the wind turns before choosing where to stand. Then we do not need the county, Beatrice said. We need only the panel, and the panel answers to evidence, not gossip. Evidence can be twisted as easily as gossip, Thaddeus said. Grey has proven that much already. Meanwhile, Corbin Ashby found himself watched wherever he travelled. A rider matching Nathaniel's colours had been seen near his warehouse twice that week, and on the third night a note arrived at his door, written in a hand he did not recognise, warning him plainly that testimony against Lord Grey would not go unanswered. Corbin brought the note directly to Blackmere the following morning, his hands unsteady as he placed it on Thaddeus's desk. He means to frighten me into silence, Corbin said. I confess it is working better than I would like to admit. Thaddeus read the note twice, his expression hardening. If you withdraw now, he said, Grey wins without ever having to prove a single claim honestly. Is that the outcome you wish to live with? Corbin was quiet for a long moment, turning his hat over in his hands. No, he said finally, but I would like protection between now and the day I stand before those magistrates. I have a family of my own to consider, whatever debts I have helped create for others. Thaddeus agreed, arranging for 2 of his most trusted men to remain near Corbin's household until the inquiry concluded. It was a small measure, but one that seemed to steady the moneylender's resolve considerably, and he left Blackmere that afternoon, walking a little taller than he had arrived. Barnaby Croft arrived at Blackmere unannounced, 4 days before the inquiry, requesting a private audience with Thaddeus. Agatha, passing the study on an errand, caught enough of the conversation through the door to understand its shape before either man emerged. I have reviewed the complaint Grey filed, Croft said. He has built his argument entirely on the assumption that the sale itself constitutes proof of dishonourable conduct. If you can demonstrate the debt was manufactured rather than genuine, his entire case collapses before it reaches the magistrates properly. We have Ashby's testimony for that, Thaddeus said. Testimony alone may not be enough, Croft warned. Grey is clever. He will argue Ashby was paid to lie in your favour just as easily as he will claim the original debt was manufactured. You need something harder to dismiss. Written proof, if such a thing exists. Thaddeus considered this for a long moment. There may be one place to look, he said finally. Ashby mentioned Grey approached him over a year ago. If any correspondence exists between them regarding the arrangement, it would still be among Ashby's private papers. That evening, Thaddeus rode to Ashby's estate himself, returning past midnight with a small bundle of letters carefully wrapped in cloth. Agatha waited in the study when he arrived, unable to sleep despite the late hour. "Did you find anything?" she asked. Thaddeus set the bundle on the desk, untying it carefully to reveal several letters bearing Nathaniel's unmistakable seal. "Enough," he said. Grey was careless in his early correspondence with Ashby, believing perhaps that a moneylender's discretion could always be purchased along with his silence. These letters discuss the arrangement plainly, including instructions to press Silas harder once his debt reached a sum large enough to force a desperate decision. Agatha read through the letters slowly, her hands tightening around the pages, as the full extent of Nathaniel's scheme became undeniable in his own handwriting. One letter in particular described her by name before the sale had even been proposed to Silas, referring to her as the instrument by which the Reeve household might finally be brought low. "He knew my name before my own husband told me what he intended," Agatha said quietly. "He was never interested in Silas at all. I was the target from the very beginning." Thaddeus's expression darkened further as he watched her set the letter down. "Then he has wronged you more directly than even I understood," he said. "This is not merely an attack on my house. It is an attack he built around you specifically, long before either of us knew his name." Agatha sat with that thought for a long while after Thaddeus retired, staring into the dying fire until the weight of it settled into something closer to resolve than fear. "Then we have what we need," Thaddeus said, before leaving her to the quiet. "Though I suspect Gray will not surrender easily, even faced with his own words." He was right. Word reached Blackmare 2 days later that Nathaniel had begun spreading a different version of events throughout the capital, one in which Agatha herself had conspired with Thaddeus from the start, using her own marriage as a means to secure a wealthier match. The rumor spread quickly among circles eager for scandal, painting her not as a victim of circumstance, but as a calculating woman who had orchestrated her own sale. Agatha received the news with a stillness that worried Beatrice more than any outburst would have. "He means to destroy whatever sympathy the truth might earn me," Agatha said quietly. "If the magistrates believe I chose this willingly for gain, the letters proving the debt was manufactured matter far less." "We will answer it directly," Beatrice said. "Silas can testify to your character before the sale. No one who knew you then would believe you capable of the scheme Gray describes now." "Silas," Agatha said slowly, the name feeling strange after everything that had passed since she last spoke it in her own house. He arrived at Blackmare the following afternoon, summoned by a letter from Beatrice explaining the accusation now circulating against his former wife. Silas looked older than Agatha remembered, the weeks since the sale having worn visibly on him. "I heard what Gray was saying," he said, standing awkwardly near the study door. "It is not true. Any of it. You never once suggested such an arrangement. Not before the sale, not after." "I know what is true," Agatha said. "The question is whether the magistrates will believe it without your word standing beside mine." Silas nodded slowly, his hands twisting the brim of his hat. "Then I will give it," he said. "Whatever else I have failed to do, I will not let Gray twist your character into something it never was. Not while I still have breath to correct him. I owe you that much. And far more besides." It was the closest thing to an apology Agatha had received since the coach first carried her away from her old life, and though it did little to repair what had already broken between them, it settled something quietly in her chest nonetheless. Before he left, Silas paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she had not seen on his face in a long time. "I hope you find here what I couldn't give you," he said, then turned and walked back toward his waiting horse without waiting for a reply. The morning of the inquiry arrived grey and still, the capital's streets crowded with carriages bearing families, eager to witness whatever scandal the day would produce. Agatha sat beside Thaddeus in the coach, her hand steady despite the storm gathering in her stomach, while Beatrice reviewed her notes one final time across from them. "You need not speak more than the truth requires," Beatrice reminded her. Let Grey exhaust himself trying to twist it. The panel will see the shape of things clearly enough on their own. The chamber where the magistrates convened was larger than Agatha had imagined, rows of benches filled with spectators whose presence made the air feel thinner somehow. Nathaniel Grey sat near the front, composed and confident, exchanging quiet words with his own counsel, as though certain of the outcome already. The proceedings opened with Nathaniel's formal complaint read aloud before the panel, outlining accusations of dishonorable conduct in the acquisition of the Duke's household, and questioning whether such conduct reflected a broader pattern unworthy of the Blackmere title. Agatha felt the weight of every eye in the room settle upon her as her name was spoken aloud in connection with the charges. Thaddeus rose first, presenting the letters recovered from Ashby's estate, reading select passages aloud that revealed Nathaniel's own hand in manufacturing the debt that led to the sale. A murmur moved through the chamber as the implications settled over the assembled spectators. Nathaniel's counsel objected immediately, arguing the letters proved nothing beyond ordinary financial dealings between two men, but the magistrates permitted Corbin Ashby to be called forward regardless. Corbin's testimony, though delivered with visible nerves, held firm under questioning, confirming that Nathaniel had approached him over a year before the sale with explicit instructions to press Silas toward ruin. Under cross-examination, Nathaniel's counsel attempted to suggest Corbin had been paid to fabricate his account, but Corbin held his composure, producing his own ledgers showing payments received from Nathaniel dated well before any arrangement with Silas existed. "I did not invent these entries for today's convenience," Corbin said. "They have sat in my books for over a year, long before I had any reason to expect they would matter to anyone but myself." The panel exchanged glances at this, and Nathaniel's confident posture near the front of the chamber shifted slightly for the first time that morning. Nathaniel's counsel began his cross-examination of Silas next, who was called forward to testify plainly to his former wife's character, dismissing the rumor of conspiracy as invention with no foundation in anything he had witnessed during their marriage. "She never once spoke of the Duke before that morning," Silas said. "She did not know his name until the coach arrived at our gate. Whatever Lord Grey wishes this panel to believe, I stood beside her for years, and I know what I am telling you is true." When Agatha herself was finally called to speak, she rose with a steadiness that surprised even her, addressing the panel directly, rather than waiting for questions to draw the truth from her carefully. "I did not choose the circumstances that brought me to Blackmere," she said. "I was given no voice in the decision that ended my marriage and began another arrangement entirely. Whatever Lord Grey wishes the panel to believe about calculation or gain, the truth is simpler than the story he has told. I was sold to settle a debt I did not create, by a scheme I did not understand until long after it had already reshaped my life completely." She paused, letting the words settle before continuing. "What I found afterward, in the household that took me in, was not the cruelty rumor suggested, nor the conspiracy Lord Grey now claims. It was simply an attempt to build something honest out of circumstances that began dishonorably. If that offends the sensibilities of this panel, then perhaps the panel should ask why a man's scheme to destroy two households deserves less scrutiny than the households he sought to ruin." One of the magistrates leaned forward at this, addressing her directly for the first time. "You claim Lord Grey targeted you specifically," he said. "What proof do you offer beyond your own account?" Agatha nodded to Thaddeus, who produced the final letter from the bundle, the one naming her before the sale had ever been proposed. The clerk read it aloud before the full chamber, and this time the murmur that moved through the benches carried a different weight entirely, one closer to outrage than curiosity. The chamber remained silent for a long moment after the reading finished, the magistrates exchanging quiet glances before the eldest among them finally spoke. "The evidence presented today raises serious questions regarding Lord Grey's conduct in this matter," he said. "This panel finds insufficient grounds to question the legitimacy of the Blackmere title and recommends a separate inquiry be opened into Lord Grey's role in manufacturing the circumstances behind this complaint, including his apparent premeditated targeting of Mrs. Colworth herself." Nathaniel rose sharply, his composure finally abandoning him completely as he addressed the panel directly. "This is absurd," he said. "Everything I have presented is true. The sale happened exactly as described." "The sale happened," the magistrate agreed evenly. "The circumstances that created it did not happen honestly, by your own correspondence. That distinction matters a great deal in this chamber, my lord, whatever it may have meant to you when you began this scheme." Nathaniel was escorted from the chamber shortly after, his protests trailing behind him as guards led him toward whatever consequences awaited a man who had gambled his standing on a plot now unraveled completely in front of the very audience he had hoped would witness his rival's downfall instead of his own. The ride back to Blackmere passed in a quiet that felt entirely different from the tense silences that had marked the weeks before. Agatha watched the familiar hills roll past the window, feeling for the first time since that grey morning in her old garden that the ground beneath her had finally settled into something solid. "You spoke well today," Thaddeus said, breaking the silence as the manor gates came into view. "I spoke honestly," Agatha said. It seemed the only weapon left that Grey had not already tried to twist against me. "It was enough," Thaddeus said. "More than enough." They arrived to find the household gathered in the entrance hall, word of the outcome having reached Blackmere well before the coach itself. Mrs. Whitfield's eyes were bright with relief as she welcomed them inside, and even Josiah abandoned his roses long enough to offer a rare, wide smile from the garden path. Toby ran alongside the coach the final stretch to the stables, grinning at Agatha through the window the whole way. That evening, Beatrice found Agatha alone in the library, staring out at the darkened gardens with a stillness that suggested her thoughts had wandered somewhere far beyond the room itself. "You saved this house today," Beatrice said, settling into the chair beside her. "Whatever began as a debt paid in desperation, you have earned your place here through something far sturdier than the papers that first brought you." Agatha considered this for a long moment. "I did not choose to come here," she said, "but I find I no longer wish to leave, whatever that says about how far I have travelled from the woman who stepped out of that coach a season ago." Beatrice smiled, rising to leave her to the quiet she seemed to need. "Perhaps that is simply what happens," she said, "when something built badly finds a way to become something worth keeping after all." Thaddeus found her there later. The fire burned low, the house settling into the particular silence that follows a long and difficult day. "Grey will face his own inquiry now," he said. "Croft believes he may lose his standing entirely once the full extent of his scheme comes to light." Agatha nodded slowly. "And Blackmere?" she asked. "What becomes of it now?" Thaddeus considered the question longer than she expected. "Whatever it becomes," he said, "I would like it to become that with you standing beside me, not merely as the woman these papers once bound to me, but as someone who chose to stay when she finally had reason to leave." Agatha looked at him for a long moment, weighing the distance she had travelled since that grey morning outside her old gate. "Then let it become that," she said quietly. In the weeks that followed, Blackmere settled into a rhythm unlike any it had known before, one shaped not by scandal or debt, but by the slow, steady trust that had grown between two people bound first by circumstance, and later by something neither had expected to find within it. Silas returned occasionally, no longer as a husband, but as something closer to a distant friend, his own household slowly rebuilding its standing under Hesper's watchful guidance. Corbin Ashby closed his ledgers on the old debt for good, calling it settled in every sense that mattered. Nathaniel Gray's scheme, once intended to destroy the very foundation of the Blackmere name, had instead revealed the strength quietly built within it, a household that had begun in dishonor, but chosen, deliberately and steadily, to become something honest in its place. And Agatha, who had once believed herself merely a debt paid to settle another man's ruin, found instead that she had become the very thing that had saved the house meant to destroy her.